Hello, everyone. I am Beth, and welcome to the Q&A with Ajeya Cotra. Ajeya is a Senior Research Analyst at the Open Philanthropy project. She's worked on various different things, including forecasting AI timelines and very broad estimates of impact of funding different areas and how to implement worldview diversification. She joined Open Philanthropy in 2016, and her background before that was a degree in computer science. Without further ado, welcome, Ajeya.
Thanks, Beth. Good to be here.
Yeah, so as a first question, maybe you could describe just like very broadly what you've been working on recently, and like maybe how the kind of AI timelines forecasting impacts like Openflow's decisions and like influences what they do.
Yeah, so late last year in September or so, I published a draft report for a model on when we might get what we call transformative AI, which in the report I kind of operationalized this, or the broad definition is AI that causes a transition as dramatic as the Industrial Revolution. And the way I operationalize this in the report is it causes at least a 10x speed up in the growth rate of the whole world economy that's sustained. And so I was trying to forecast when we might get AI that might do that, and published a sort of framework that is essentially asking the question, like, when might we be able to afford to train a machine learning model that is as powerful as the human brain? So I was drawing on work that my colleague Joe Carl-Smith did, thinking about how can you think about how computationally powerful the human brain is. And since then, I've been doing projects that are kind of like building off of that or going on tangents from that in various ways. So one thing I've been thinking about is just kind of drawing on how the previous project involved learning a bunch about machine learning, neural networks, et cetera. I'm now thinking about like, what do we hope, what kinds of alignment research do we hope people do on these state-of-the-art neural networks that maybe, you know, isn't being done as much as it could be. So like 2 months ago, I wrote a post on the alignment forum and Less Wrong about that. And now I'm kind of thinking more broadly about like, what are the types of work we'd like to see funded? And then I'm also trying, but not particularly succeeding yet, in trying to benchmark the value of the last dollar within the AI cause area. So the idea is that if we're funding something today, what that's trading off against is the last thing we could have funded. So if we spend $1 million extra dollars this year, then that's $1 million we couldn't spend on like whatever our sort of least favorite thing turns out to be. So trying to estimate what that least favorite thing is might give us a sense of like what our bar should be for grant making. So I've been like poking around at different angles on that. It's so far seemed kind of elusive, but I kind of occasionally keep coming back to that to try and think about what another good angle might be.
What are some plausible ways that Openflow would spend like a very large amount of money on AI? Like, what are you thinking or think that might take up a big chunk of the money?
Yeah, so if the field, so one reason that I wrote the blog post I mentioned earlier on aligning narrowly superhuman models, the concept there is basically take a model that exists today, like GPT-3, that seems to have the potential to do some helpful task, like, you know, give you medical advice or write really good stories. But it isn't quite doing that task because what it's trying to do is just predict what people would say on the internet. But in some sense, it has the skills necessary to do that task if it sort of turned its attention to doing it. And then find ways to kind of cheaply fine tune the model using feedback from humans, most likely, to be able to do those tasks. So one thing that I find intriguing about that, I go into the reasons why I think this would reduce X risk. But it also feels pretty scalable to me in that the kind of models will grow in their richness and in the number of different tasks they could theoretically do. And aligning it is a reasonable amount of work. And you could have more and more projects in this vein going forward. So that's like a thing you could spend a chunk of money on. Other things you might end up spending money on, depending on how alignment shakes out in terms of how expensive it is. I think like a thing that Openflow might end up spending money on is subsidizing alignment. So if various companies would have otherwise trained an AI system in a sort of less safe but cheaper way, paying for them to, directly paying for the extra expenses of training it in a more safe way might be another option.
Do you think that's more likely to look like, you know, sort of funding an alternative project to the mainstream ones that's, you know, would not be competitive without your kind of extra investment? Or would that be more sort of like going to an existing player and being like, look, we'll give you this money if you do this thing?
It could be a mix. My personal guess is that it would be something that more goes through existing players. Another way I've thought about how it might play out is that we might have organizations that are selling alignment as a service to various labs. So it'd be like, we will take your model, or, you know, we don't necessarily need access to its weights, depending again on what the alignment algorithm turns out to be. If there's like an algorithm that you can implement with humans, where like all the work is really kind of arranging the humans in the right way to get the right reward signal out, then you might offer as a service aligning other labs' models with just a fine-tuning API. So that might be a way it plays out as well. That's kind of like a third option to those two. But I imagine that like the sort of existing big players are not going to go away, and it will be like relatively tough to compete with them. And also there are just like risks to starting and boosting competitors. So I kind of lean toward either kind of alignment as a service orgs or incentives for existing organizations. But, you know, it kind of depends on how it plays out.
Yeah. I'm interested if there are other broad sort of like types of alignment research you think sort of we're missing or could be scaled up more, apart from the sort of like, you know, practice doing the task of alignment in a narrower case.
Yeah, very recently I've been thinking about whether there are good ways to make either demonstrations or measurements, if that's possible, of particular failure modes we think will crop up later. So, you know, I'd be very excited, and I don't know how feasible this is, so it's not something that I'm necessarily gonna like want to go out and tell people to do if it turns out not to be feasible, but something I'd be excited to see are sort of clearer demonstrations of inner optimization, inner alignment failures, like bad things happening as a result of alignment failures of various kinds in existing state-of-the-art systems, because I suspect there's kind of a lot there that hasn't been cataloged. So kind of red teaming GPT-3 or red teaming products that are built off of fine-tuning GPT-3, finding inputs on which they behave badly in ways that could be like explained by inner or outer misalignment, and kind of finding systematic ways to get them to behave badly and documenting that and analyzing why that happens. Seems like pretty exciting.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that is also something I've been thinking about recently. It seems like yeah, or at least certainly the just like showing that some system is doing something that's like somewhat undesirable or just like kind of underperforming that has an alignment explanation seems pretty straightforward. I'm like finding examples of like inner alignment failure feels a lot harder to me. I don't know if you have like ideas about how.
I think I would guess that you couldn't just like, you know, look at GPT-3 and be like, oh, it answers this question in this weird way. That's an inner alignment failure. But I think you might be able to kind of explicitly attempt to elicit treacherous behavior in certain settings and within certain tasks. So like, I don't know how feasible this is right now, but stuff like, you know, training a system to play some game or get some high reward, but like kind of giving it the opportunity, but not necessarily like obvious kind of reward for something that's like cheating, like hacking. You know, we have models that can write code. So it would be cool to demonstrate even existing relatively small in the scheme of things models doing like code injection attacks or something like that. So you'd need to really like, I think the reason this is hard, and I haven't really thought hard enough about it, is like, how do you create a situation encouraging it to cheat or do some kind of inner optimize-y thing or do something that feels treacherous without that kind of invalidating the realism of the example,
Right.
or making it seem like you just forced it to happen and so of course it happened. But I think there might be some middle ground there that could be explored. And I think, you know, there are toy demonstrations of this that I'm not totally sure what to make of, and not totally sure are that compelling, where, you know, there's this DeepMind paper where like the reward signal.
The Gridwell's paper, or are you thinking of something else?
Yeah, I think I was thinking of something where it's like the reward is described by moving around some boxes in the environment. Like the way you tell the model that it did a good job. Like you wanted to pick up a cup or something. The way you tell it did a good job was you arrange the boxes in like the good way. And then like the agents learn to arrange the boxes themselves rather than doing the thing that you wanted them to do.
Right.
And then that I think has like, I think it's cool, but it would be nice to go like one step more in a less forced direction, because I think an easy response to that is like, well, like you really set it up to basically force that to happen.
Right. Yeah. So someone asked in the chat, out of the AI research Openflow will ever fund, how much do you expect to be done by people primarily motivated by X risk reduction versus people motivated by, for example, building AI the right way?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So far in our funding, it's been a mix, and it's definitely not been like super heavily weighted in one direction or another. Like we fund MIRI, which is wholly X risk motivated, but we also fund various academics who are interested in the X risk stuff and also interested in various other near-term problems and have like kind of inherent intellectual interest in the problems. So I'm not sure. I'd guess going forward, it'll continue to be more of a mix. A thing I hope we can do is kind of better delineate like specific problems that are concrete enough for anyone to understand what we mean, which we feel are like directly connected to X risk. Because there's more opportunity to scale research if you don't have to have everyone doing it. Be doing it for the exact same reason as you. But I think that's like kind of tough, and that's something that I'm like thinking about, is that actually feasible?
Okay, yeah. So one of the other questions that's got a lot of votes is, what is the most surprising to outsiders difficulty that Openflow faces in deciding how to issue AI research grants?
I don't know how surprising various difficulties would be to outsiders. I mean, I don't think this is particularly surprising, but I think a thing we're struggling with is just like, how do you evaluate the papers that come out of these grants? Like, you know, what do we get a panel of people who like we think have good thoughts about X risk, like say these papers are good and these papers are less good, like what risks of echo chambers does that create? But then on the other hand, if we lean on more broad-based measures of academic success, like citation count or prestige or all these things, like how much does that risk kind of pushing the research in a less relevant direction? So I feel like striking that balance, like getting evaluations going of any of the work we fund, the MIRI work, the academic work, and some of our other grantees like OTT, I think is an ongoing challenge. And like kind of trying to thread that needle of like, what are the aspects of work that we are in a position to be opinionated about? Like, what are we experts on versus what are the people we fund experts on? And there's a lot of disagreement about, like, you know, is X the kind of opinion where we should expect that we know better than our grantees? Or is it a kind of matter of technical research taste where we should expect our grantees know better than us? Or is it somewhere in the middle? And kind of hashing that out.
Cool. So someone else asks, how optimistic do you feel about achieving successful alignment overall, and how tractable are current methods?
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty wide range on this. Like, I think it's pretty plausible that something that is at a high level, like relatively obvious, like, you know, train your models with human feedback, like give them broad information about society, you know, train models to help your human feedback givers have better judgment, and so on. Like that cluster of things. I think the like sort of rolled forward evolution of that has a like pretty good chance of just working. It also has a pretty good chance of not working, and kind of overall risk estimates are really sensitive to complicated beliefs about like what the optimization landscape, like what the space of models we're searching over looks like, that I don't feel very confident in, and don't believe that like, you know, anyone has like good, strong information about. So, you know, like I would say conditional on transformative AI in the next couple of decades, risk is like high, but less than 50%, because I have like maybe a 50% chance that like the thing I just said with like human feedback works out without anything particularly special. And then some additional probability on that, that like we need something special and we get it because there are people working on it. So maybe I'm at like 20% risk, 25% risk.
Interesting. Yeah. I'd like to ask actually, what sort of like beliefs or claims are sort of floating around in the community, or, you know, like have been espoused in by AI people about AI that you think are like wrong, or like we, you know, sort of things that were previously said that we now realize are mistaken or something?
I think I would like to frame it as like my sort of disagreements, or disagreements I suspect I have with people, rather than things that I feel like have been overturned or like found out to be wrong. I think a thing that motivated me to write the blog post I did was that I felt that EAs who kind of weren't working on AI alignment within industry, but cared about AI alignment and were working on it in theory and stuff, kind of didn't appreciate that there was work, like actually like, you know, Paul's paper that I talk about a lot, the summarizing from human feedback. I had the sense that a lot of people, including myself at first, were just like, why is that alignment work exactly? Or like, there's this like kind of space of things that I think are actually very good for alignment, that are like easy to mistake for capabilities work. And I kind of wanted to better delineate why I thought there was like a space of stuff that like was commercially incentivized, but like actually insufficiently commercially incentivized, where there was like this delta where people focused on X risk could get into that space, that I think people weren't quite seeing, who were kind of outside of these scaling labs. So that's something that I think, that's probably the biggest thing that pops to mind. And I'm not really sure if there are others. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested whether you think there's a sort of efficient market in alignment relevant capabilities research. Like, are the existing players actually doing as much of this type of research as would be sort of rational, or are they doing like more or less of it?
I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on whether they're doing as much as would be rational from a purely commercial perspective. I think I have the opinion that like there's some amount of it that's incentivized from a purely commercial perspective, and then there's like even more of it that you should be doing if you care about X risk. So I don't think that like there's an efficient market in the sense that like they'll just kind of automatically do the amount that is optimal if you care about X risk. I don't know if there's an efficient market in the sense that they'll automatically do the amount that would be optimal from a commercial perspective. I think like I generally lean toward like pretty efficient markets on the time scale of years. But I think it might be being underdone like right this second. And I think that might be a bonus in the sense that like to the extent that EAs who are motivated by X risk want to kind of pioneer this type of work, they might get recognition from a kind of broad base of people who care about it for a number of different reasons.
So someone else asks, with respect to your work on timelines, what do you feel are the most valuable, tractable seeming open questions for further research?
Yeah, so I have in my report on the final part, I have a list of open questions. The most tractable ones in my mind are getting good hardware forecasts that have uncertainty, where my forecasts are like sort of both pretty crude in that they're just like drawing these trend lines and are point estimates. And similarly, getting good willingness to pay forecasts that have uncertainty in them. I think both of those are really high up there in terms of like changing the estimate and being quite tractable and concrete, especially the hardware one. And then I think like a notch less tractable, but potentially still tractable, is gathering more data on algorithmic progress. Like in terms of like how quickly does it actually progress? Like can we do more papers like Danny Hernandez's AI and efficiency paper or Katja Grace's like algorithmic progress in 6 domains that's kind of more updated, and then also have kind of uncertainty there in terms of what is the probability per year that we make a bigger leap than the kind of incremental progress that is modeled in the report. So yeah, I'd say all three of those are really high, and hardware is the single highest.
Oh yeah. So on the theme of papers and intellectual, algorithmic or intellectual progress, Steinfeld asked, why do you think there were fewer technical AI safety papers in 2020?
I don't know. I wasn't aware that there were fewer technical AI safety papers. Depending on the size of the change, I assume it's like noise or something. I don't know.
Seems like a reasonable answer. Yeah. I was also not aware of this, although I guess some reflection seems right. I don't know how much it's just also people not doing.
It's also
like papers
possible.
So much.
Yeah, it's possible that some of it reflects people like doing like larger, longer term projects that take longer.
Right. Yeah. And also, I guess maybe just there being some push away from
like wholly private work or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got 2 minutes, I guess.
Oh yeah. Maybe for the last minute and a half or something, do you have any sort of tips for thinking about these, kind of very difficult questions about timelines or worldview or, big difficult questions?
I mean, I got a lot out of trying to be really hardcore outside view about forecasts for when I would be done. So like I tracked a bunch of statistics while I was writing the report in terms of like how many hours did it take for me to write a page, and like how many pages were typical sections and stuff. And I like, basically repeatedly made forecasts about when I would be done with things, and then like repeatedly failed, and then just like tried to go back and figure out why that was. And I learned some things from that, which is mainly that like when I think something will be quick, and it turns out to take a lot longer, it's because I write more than I thought I would, not because I took longer to say the thing. So I think like trying to really put a lot of effort into boiling things down and like really watching page count and like trying to keep it down is helpful, which I did not succeed that well at during this project, but I think like carried forward as a lesson during future projects.